Good evening and welcome to another Wednesday night as we celebrate and journey through Women's History Month during the month of March. I'm Michael Aaron Poindexter, the proud pastor of this wonderful church, the Macedonia Baptist Church, and I welcome you wherever you are tuning in from for this Women's History Month moment. Typically, we'd have Wednesday night enrichment, but we paused this month to make sure that we can highlight the women of Macedonia who have made dramatic and incredible impacts, not just on the Macedonia community, but in the community at large. Last week, we celebrated They Walked So That We Can Run, our trailblazing pioneers who came before us and blazed trails that so many of us have had the privilege of walking through. Tonight, we highlight those who have continued the journey, those who have walked through those trails, and those who continue the work. I have with me this evening, Deacon Deborah Brown-Johnson, Sister Janice Pride Boone, and Dr. Jennifer Snead, and I'm going to let them come and introduce themselves in their own way. Deacon Deborah Brown-Johnson.
Good afternoon. My name is, as you've indicated, is Deborah Brown-Johnson, and I'm a deacon here at Macedonia. I am retired 3 years. I retired after 37 years of service, of state service. I retired as assistant commissioner within the New York State Education Department. I had worked with individuals with disabilities my entire professional career. I am a graduate of a SUNY school, SUNY Buffalo, master's degree from New York University. I've been here at Macedonia for, let me see, I count age now by my son's age. He was 11, he's 36. What is that? 36 minus 11, 25? Yes, high math. 25 years. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Dr. Pride Boone. I'm a pediatrician. I'm Harvard trained. I trained at Hopkins and Georgetown. I'm also a marriage and family therapist. I have 2 sons. I've been married almost 50 years. When I married my husband, he said, "If you marry me, honey, we'll be going places." I've lived in maybe about 16 cities. And I'm a traveling physician at this point because of that. And we joined Macedonia in the 80s, and we returned to Albany, and it was 2011, and I'm happy to be back. I'm one of helping Jackie facilitate the health ministry, and happy to be back. Thank you.
Dr. Jay Jennifer Snead. I've been at Macedonia, it seems like forever. I'm not even going to try to count the years. I'll just tell you I came in 1987 or beginning of 88, actually, I believe. It was the spring after Reverend Comether came. So I've been here. There was a slight hiatus for 3 years when we moved to Long Island, but we came back, which who does that? We did. In my professional life, I retired as being senior vice president for the Charter Schools Institute of SUNY. I was part of the original group, so the Charter Schools Act was enacted somewhere in 2000, 2001. I was the designer of their application process for charter schools. So Albany Charter Schools, chartered by SUNY through 2010, I played a role in making sure those charters happened. And that was very exciting because it was all new and you were designing things. But I've also worked for the State Education Department, just like Deacon Deb. When I left there, I was the coordinator of the work for all the BOCES district superintendents, working on behalf of the New York State Education Commissioner, which was also very exciting. And I said, I debated on whether I would mention this. So you think about challenges as you go along in your career. That job was particularly challenging. If you think back in those days, the BOCES district superintendents was basically a group of 38 white-haired white men and me. So think about starting that one. It was about 6 months as they tested me to see whether or not I could do the job. And they threw everything at me that they could find. And once that I was past that period, though, they owned me and looked at everybody askew if they came and asked me anything that they didn't agree with. So it was really an interesting period in time. I have one daughter who lives in New York City. I have a book that came out last year, Scarred But Unscathed, Growing in Faith, which has been a very exciting time in my life and hopefully the church's life, because the stories are about people from Macedonia. That's it in a nutshell.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for these wonderful introductions. Since I've been in Macedonia now a year and a month or 2 months, it's felt like longer than that, joyfully speaking. But it's only been a year, and I've worked pretty closely with all three of you. Of course, Deacon Deb, you and I work closely as you're a member of the academic ministry. Mm-hmm. Also, chapter president of the NAACP. Dr. Boone, we worked closely together as we sent 700 folks to get vaccinated at the Armory, and even still, all three of you really for the emergency management team. And Dr. Jay and I talk almost every day about everything Macedonia. But in your own right, outside of Macedonia, all three of you have had distinguished careers and have made indelible impacts on our community. How do you balance it all? How do you balance Macedonia? How do you balance your career? How do you balance your personal life? And I'll just throw it up for anyone who would like to respond.
Well, I'll jump in, and I know my sisters will jump in as well. And I have to say, first of all, audiovisual Macedonia didn't exist when I worked. I'm not sure I could have done it when I worked full time. But even as it is, having a full-time professional job where you travel, where you have kids and a family is hard, and you try to, at least I did, I tried to keep a balance with raising a child when I was a single parent. And then I met my husband, she was 12 or so. So having someone else to support you, that's where your village comes in. Because a lot of the women in Macedonia who had children around the age of my daughter, we clustered. And I said, you take mine before I kill her, and I'll take yours before you kill them. And that seemed to work. Balance.
Yeah. I think part of that, as Dr. J indicated, is having the friendship, having people that you can call upon to assist you. And for me, when I first moved here to Albany in 1989 for a fellowship program with the state ed, my son was 3 years old. And I came here, I was a single parent. I didn't know anyone in Albany, but I was blessed to have my sister-in-law who would come and watch my son, and my mother. So, and I traveled a lot. So, and I would maybe gone for 3-4 days at a time, and they would come, and that was what was helpful, that allowed me that balance. And then as I got involved in community activities, this is my 5th stint as president of the Albany NAACP. I had served 3 terms in the early 2000s. And sometimes I say to myself, I don't know how I worked a full-time job and traveled and also served as president. But you figure out a way. Things work out for you. You meet people and you have a sense of that level of discernment of who will be there to assist you and you them. And so I have created, with God's blessing, some wonderful friendships that have sustained me and supported me, and that allowed me to have that balance as my son grew up, that will watch him as I run, and I will return the favor to them. But also, as I came to Macedonia, because I didn't come to Macedonia, so I think now 1994, and met people here, found my way into the hospitality, found quietness. And I think that was the other balance for me. I worked, I was a supervisor, I did monitoring and service delivery. I dealt with consumer complaints. So I spent a lot of time on the phone talking to people. So I needed a place where I can be quiet. So yeah, you want me to turn over the chicken? I can do that. You want me to, lay out the food on the platters? I can do that because I can be quiet and let that happen. And so that was where finding your space, and what works for you is one of the things that worked for me.
I don't know if this is on. My son, I have 3 children, and my son only has 2. And he says, Mom, I don't know how you did it. Because he says, I only have 2, and I can't figure out how you possibly did it with 3. And again, I lived in Atlantic City, New Orleans, Memphis, Las Vegas, San Bernardino, Albuquerque. I've lost track of all the cities that I've lived in. And I would just create family. I got on my knees every morning. I prayed. And you had to ask God for intuition and insight. Who were healthy? Who was spiritual? Who would be a good family and a good fit for my children? Because everywhere you went, you had to find family. And you had to find good, healthy people who could be family for your children and who could you trust with your family. So I had to find a healthy church. And that could sometimes take 6 months before you found healthy people that you could trust your children with. So they had to be spirit-filled. They had to know the Lord. Then I had to find Jack and Jill. So you had to find healthy places where you could put your children and turn your back. And don't forget, I was on call. So I could have to leave 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning. And my husband was Solicitor General. He was busy. So I had to turn them over. So I had to have faith that I was turning and leaving them with people I could trust. So it was asking God to lead me and leave them in safe places. So it was a lot of trust and a lot of faith.
I just wanted to add a couple of other items to the list, and one would be the support of your spouse, trying to have balance, that they, one, supported you in your work, supported you with care of the offspring. And then the other piece was exercise. I exercised to de-stress. And then I exercised just to feel good, whether it was stress or no stress. And it's also where I can be quiet, as Deacon Deb said. So when I'm on the treadmill doing miles, like I did 6.25 miles today. And when I'm on there, I can just walk, run, or do whatever. And I'm not on my phone. I'm not responding to texts or anything like that. So that was another piece for balance.
Awesome. So all three of you have remarkable careers or continuing in remarkable careers. What were some of the challenges that you had to navigate as women in leadership as you went and continued to rise through your career and your journey as you made your mark on the professional world?
Well, one of the things for me, when I first came to Albany, I'm a rehabilitation counselor by profession. And I started my career working with individuals who are visually impaired and blind in New York City. I worked with the Commission for the Blind for 8 years before, as I said, coming here to Albany. So I came to a place working with people with physical and mental disabilities, the state agency that governs those programs. And working in a place, coming in new, I came in at a time that particular agency, and you might remember this, Dr. Jay, had gone through a reorganization, and people weren't happy with the reorganization, the new administration that came in. I happened to come in at the same time as part of the fellowship program, but people didn't know who I was. And so they connected me with the new administration. So not everyone was happy to see me come in the door. Not everyone was friendly. Not everyone was glad to see me. Also, with the program that I came in under, was a program that was designed to bring African Americans into management positions within the state education department. Now, if you've worked for the state, you know that the idea of state government is that you take your turn. You wait until you take an exam. You wait, and you wait. And so when there was a group of us, I came in on the second group of this program. So there was 8 of us in this program. And we all you had to have at least a master's degree and 8 years experience. But you're coming into government service where people believe the purpose of that program was to teach you how to work behaviors, work habits. And so they don't look at the fact that you're coming in as an experienced professional. And so there was animosity towards us from the very beginning of coming into the program. It was a regent's program that was designed by the regent. So that didn't have us in favor. And so through the midst of all of this, I had choices. I could, come in, I can greet people, or I can be miserable, or I can deal with them in anger. I chose to be myself. And so I came in and I greeted everyone. I took people from where they were. I also knew what skills I had. And so I was coming into a rehabilitation program. I'm a professional rehabilitation counselor. I had to lead with what I knew. And so when I met people, I shared with them that I had the skill that they had, and that my job here was to provide them with information, to deal with a consumer complaint. And so we deal on that level. You don't necessarily have to break bread with me, because I'm not asking us to go to lunch, but we're professionals here and we're going to work through this issue. Also, as I moved through my career, still with the same agency, I had opportunities. I moved up into a management position. Then I had the responsibility for oversight for our programs throughout the state. We had 15 district offices. The people who were in charge of the district office program and had to report to me did not look like me. They were white, mostly white male, and they weren't always happy. Even when I became their supervisor, some would say, well, I think she's my supervisor. Well, we all knew I was your supervisor. I can argue with you or I can do my job, which still meant you had to report to me. We had to work together to get the job done and provide service to our consumers in the state. And we did that. And we moved through the issues. It is not problem-free, but it's how you deal with what comes your way. It's the thing that I found most helpful to me.
Yeah. So I think challenge-wise, I think as you move into upper management, upper leadership positions where people are looking to you to make policy decisions, one of the things I did once I left classroom teaching and then district level, one of the things I wanted to do was make policies that would affect more children, more families, which is why I went into education, policy, politics, and law. So I had the chance to draft legislative language. I had the chance to represent at state ed, the regents, and at SUNY, the trustees. But I think when you're in those positions, the expectations are extremely high. There is a significant amount of pressure, and you put a lot of pressure on yourself as well, because you feel the weight of you're in a position where someone like you has not been. And it requires that you're able to still yourself. And I think all the things we talked about before in terms of balance come into play. You spend an inordinate amount of time reading, reviewing, researching so that you can speak knowledgeably, that you're comfortable, but you do need to know who you are. And I think people will challenge you. I've heard of people say they've been in positions where people have spoken ill to them using names that you do not call yourself. And I never let that happen. I think sometimes people are afraid to say, well, that's not my name. I won't respond to that name and you won't use that, for fear of retribution, for fear of losing their job. But what I have found is that when you do step up, people do respect you. You know, it's almost like the big dog wins, not that I'm trying to be the big dog, but you will not address me in ways that are not appropriate. I have a lot of knowledge to share. I will work with you, but that is always a challenge, especially as Deacon Deb said, when you come into that position and those around you, when you go to conferences and there are, 4, 5, you can count on your hand, you know, how many people in that room look like you. So the expectations and the pressure, they're extreme.
Of course, medical school, training. I'd walk in a room and the patient would say, "Can you hand me the bedpan?" And I'd go, "Sure, but I'm actually here to examine you and make your diagnosis and treat you and make you well, but I'm happy to hand you the bedpan." And I'd hand them the bedpan and proceed with why I was there. And I'd make rounds. And of course, I'd be with the orthopedic surgeons and I'd have to go get a stool so I could stand up and be heard and listen to and make the diagnosis and treatment. And I'd make the diagnosis and I'd put them to shame and it'd be like, you'd have to put their head down, and I'd be, yep, I'm still taller than all of you here. So it would be might makes right, but intelligence still stands out. So, and then I'd be in a room, and always before I go into a room, I pray, because what people are looking for is competence. Mm-hmm. But as Deacon will tell you, and she's always so good, I know when you guys are on the prayer line, she always reminds you, 1 John 4, love. If you don't have love, you have nothing. Mm-hmm. So before you walk in the room, 2 things you bring any patient's room is love and competence. Mm-hmm. Because if you can't diagnose them and treat them, they don't want to see you again. But more importantly, or as important, is you love them. Mm-hmm. You have to love them, and you have to want to get them well. So I bring those, I pray every time that I bring God, Jesus with me into that room, and I bring competence into that room. And I leave, and when they know that, they want to see it. So I want the black doctor. I want that black doctor. We're that black doctor. So they may start out with, so I remember the 7-year-old white child who had mono, and so I got her, well, that's really hard, really. So she told her mother, I walked in back in the room, and she said, I like you so much. You dance so well. And the mother wanted to go into the middle of the floor. She was like, and the little girl the mother and the little girl couldn't figure out what? Didn't make any sense. So the mother just wanted to go into the hole in the floor, because that just didn't make any sense. So, you never seen me dance. So they just, had to correct themselves. So it just, they couldn't help it. But I mean, you made me well. I thank you so much. So it's just, sometimes they can't help themselves. But it's like, it's okay. I love you and I made you well. It's no problem. So they're just issues, and we didn't make the world. We're just trying to live in it. So we love and we bring Jesus. That's what God does for us. And that's what we do. So we just forge along.
Great points. And I think there's even a thread there that was picked up from the very beginning. Dr. J spoke about working in BOCES and navigating the bunch of superintendents or others who worked in the professional context who didn't think she belonged in the room, right? And Deacon Deb spoke to, those who reported to her but didn't want to publicly acknowledge that she was their supervisor, right? And you're speaking of going into hospital rooms where you're there to diagnose a patient, and you are not getting the level of respect that you are entitled to. How do you navigate that? What do you say to yourself in the morning when you wake up? What do you say to yourself as you're going through the day to help you navigate when people are not willing to give you the respect that you are so deserving of? And for that woman or person who's listening, who's dealing with that very thing right now, what would you tell them?
Right. One thing is you really need to know yourself. You need to know who you are, what you know, be confident about those things, and remain consistent when you go out there. You almost have to put on your cloak of your shield of God's grace around you, because there are people out there that don't like you just for the sheer fact you're who you are, or you're in a position that they think they should have been in, right? Or they should have gotten for whatever reason. I know many mornings I would, okay, we're going to get ready to go out. You put on your armor. This is who I am. This is what I do. Here's what I'm going to say. And like I said, you speak forthright, and don't worry about the outcome of that, as long as you're saying what's true, what's correct, and what people really need to know. But I think it's in here that you know who you are, and you can't let anybody out there affect that.
And I think the lieutenant governor spoke to that yesterday when he said, you're not your title, it's what you do. But I think these are the microaggressions that we deal with every day, all the time. And if we don't recognize, God can't heal what you don't feel. So if you don't acknowledge, that was a microaggression, that was an insult. So it isn't like I just swallowed it and took it and didn't acknowledge it, because I'm talking about things that happened 20, 30, 40 years ago. So I acknowledge it, but I lay it before Christ. I don't God said, don't go to sleep with that anger. So I put that before Christ. I acknowledge the pain. So I tell a good friend. I'll tell it to my pastor. I will share it with my husband. I tell my children. So I share it and I lay it and I slay it. So I ask God to help me not maintain any anger or bitterness toward that person. As Christ would say, forgive them, for they know not what they do or say. It's their issue. But I don't try to bury it. I don't act like it didn't happen. I'm going to exercise it. I'm going to be mindful of it. And I know the little girl didn't mean it. I mean, it's just how they think we just dance. I mean, she didn't mean it. And so I forgive her. She doesn't know. And I try not to hold on to it. And I try to hope and pray that a better world is coming one day. One day we won't have to live in a world that believes this. But I don't just let it go. I do try to acknowledge it and heal it. Because if I don't feel and acknowledge it, that's a microaggression. That's going to cause inflammation. I'm going to get sick. I mean, we suffer from senility. We have Alzheimer's 2 to 3 times the rate of other races. And that's because we deal with these microaggressions all the time. And if we don't deal with it, we suffer. So I try to acknowledge that.
I would agree with both of them. I think also one of the things that's worked for me is that I have to pick and choose my battles because things come at you so quick, so often. If you spend your time fighting and responding to each one of them, to that person, to that situation, you will go down in flames because that will be your entire day. That would consume you. So I think what, Dr. Boone is saying in terms of where do you put it? Where do you place it to get the strength, to draw strength from, for you to go forward, is the balance that you look for. I think in what Dr. Jay is saying too, in terms of wrapping yourself up, girding yourself, and the armor that's needed to go out. We know our situations, but we know who can help us through them. And that's the place where we go with God. But there are certain situations, and you pick and choose them. You decide when someone has crossed the line, and you may have to push that person back and keep moving. Push them back and keep moving. Sometimes you have to put something on the table and leave it and remind people who you are in the context of where you are and keep going. Because if you stop and dwell and hang with them, they're going to suck you in. And your thing is to stay above this fray, because that's their madness. It's not yours. And you don't want to take it on as that.
So true. And definitely points an intersectionality there. I wonder how you were able to get to where you are, right? That opportunity that you chase after, that experience that you encountered that rubbed you the wrong way, but yet you moved forward. That wasn't something that was just built in. My wondering is if you had a mentor who got you to this point, who showed you the ropes, who gave you the wisdom on how to navigate that. And if you had a mentor, who was that mentor and what role did they have in your journey?
Good question. I'm kind of partly smiling in that the mentors really were in my family. My father was a great mentor for me. He pastored, for 50 years. I watched him navigate the race issues. I watched him navigate working with congregations and all that comes with that. I watched him speak and teach. And like Black churches did then and do now, it's a place where we have the opportunity to learn how to speak in front of a group, right? You get that practice. If you're going to sing, whatever you're going to do, you had those experiences. And then the other was my oldest brother. He's 7 years older than I. He was very successful. Now, he was a basketball player, so, instant fame and glory in the high school days. But he also spoke well. He went off to Vietnam as a Marine and came back and finished college, went off into the business, the corporate world, and he was very successful. And I idolized my brother. He gave me a lot of lessons that I could apply and use in my life. I think my other brother, who was 2 years older than I, he passed last year, taught me other things about living. So many of you may not know, but when I was younger, my brother that was only 2 years older than I, he was into cars. So he and I would banter about cars, how they're made. I could tell you what year, what kind of motor they had. He showed me how to change oil and tires because I like to go off by myself. He says, you can't do that without knowing. You got to know how to change your tires, so somebody's going to rip you off or somebody's going to look under your hood and say, you need this, and you really don't. So I used to be able to know how to change oil. I know all the parts of an engine. So really those types of mentors were in my family. And then my mother, being the pastor's wife, was asked to speak, at all the churches all over the place. And so I watched her. I watched her prepare. I watched her deliver. I watched her deal with how people treated you in ways that probably not the way you wanted to be treated, but then how she responded. As Deacon Deb says, you pick and choose. But so my family around me, and I could go on, where a lot of people were in my family immediately. And of course, there were those there on the larger scale. You looked at the people in history and Dr. Martin Luther King and all the people who were getting elected, all those things too. But the most immediate ones for me were really right there around me all the time.
I was the first one to go to college, so I didn't have any direct family members to show me the way. But we had a Black medical society, so I had other Black physicians to lead the way. So I just followed their tracks, and I kept their images in my head. If they could do it, I could do it. So, and when I was in medical school, I didn't come from a family of faith. My mother sort of talked about God, but I'm not clear. I try not to take anybody's inventory, but I'm not sure what her relationship to God was. She kind of talked about him, but not quite. And one of my best friends from medical school told me about God, and she kept showing me the Bible, and she kept taking me to church. But she also introduced me to coffee, and you can hear my New York accent, like coffee. So, way too much coffee. We were in MIT library all weekend drinking coffee and reading medical books. And by Sunday night, I was in such pain. And she gave me the Bible, and we were in a lot of medical books and the Bible, and I landed on Proverbs 3:8, and he said he'd be healing to my navel, and my belly pain went away. I said, there really is a God, and he knows my name. And I said, I'm going to church with you, Debbie. And that was 1975, and I never looked back. I've been in church ever since. I was like, thank you, Lord. Thank you, my belly's so much better. And so, I had Debbie and a lot of Black physicians around me. And I'm like, I got this. So God never let me go. I'm so grateful. So,
yeah. I think like Dr. Jay and some of what you're saying, Dr. Boone, was my family. And my cousin, who's just a year older than me, was the first one in my age group that went off to college. And so I was like, well, Barbara can go. There was never a thought in my mind that I couldn't go as well. So going off, and I was the first in my immediate family to go off to college. But my mother was always supportive. My mother was always encouraging. So there was never anything that I thought that I couldn't do or that I wouldn't be able to have an opportunity to try. And as I got older and observed different things, I had the blessing as I've gotten older to see it of being kind of like in two families, because I have my mother and then I had my father and his family. He was a minister. So seeing church in a different way gave me some insight and some skills and knowledge to work with. It really wasn't until I got to state ed that I really got a mentor. And Marge, I don't know if you remember Marge Tierney. So I worked with Marge for a number of years, and she was very good. And I think, she saw a lot of things in me. We were put together, which has been part of my professional journey. God has placed me with people that I didn't know and didn't know me. Even in my role as assistant commissioner, the deputy commissioner, and I were placed together. We didn't know each other. When it was decided that we were going to work together, he was in Buffalo and I was here. And so I asked the person that made the decision, well, can we meet each other? Can we least talk, and he asked the same. He drove from Buffalo to Syracuse. I drove from here to Syracuse. We met, we talked, we liked each other, and we spent the next 5 years managing the state agency. In a lot of ways, God has done things for me that I didn't even know existed. I've been positioned in places that that doors were opened for me, that I didn't even know that door was there.
Wow.
And I think in what I've learned from the other people in my life was, how do I move through them? How do I take advantage in the sense of, this is before you. How do you work well with it? How do you do what you do best and provide the service and the experience that you have, that you're doing well by it as you go forward? And that's what I've done. And I think those are things that I did learn, that I've learned from my mother. I've learned from my 6th grade teacher, was my friend up until his passing a couple of years ago. And he was 90 years old at the time he's passed. People that have stayed in my life consistently have been people who have been the role models for me.
Wow, that's awesome. You know, even as you've gone through life and you've navigated professional life and personal life and what have you, family life, how did you, when you were at a crossroads and you had to make a decision, how did you make that decision? You know, what was it that you leaned on that helped you navigate which way to go?
You're looking at me.
I am, but it don't have to be. It could be anybody up here.
So there have been many crossroads in my life in terms of making decisions about which way do you go, what do you do, how do you handle it. And I think part of me just gets still, gets quiet, and goes within, meditate on it for a while. But then I also had to have faith from my own experiences that God hasn't put me anywhere where I couldn't do what was set before me, even if it was something I hadn't done before. I had to really hold tight to, all right, you got this. You can do this. Because with God, you can do anything. I mean, literally. People say that, but I'm not sure how much they really believe it. I think about some of the choices. So becoming the first female, the first African-American who was the coordinator of the district superintendents. I followed a white guy. He left. And then there was me looking at all these men in this room. There might have been 1 or 2 females, but, you know, and you're like, okay, we got this. You can't let that fear stop you from moving on. But it was a faith thing. And I think I had been through so many personal faith things, physical things that had happened to me along the way and surgeries. And it's like, oh, if I believe, I pray, I don't worry about it anymore because it's done. It's done. So I claim it before you're there. And it has been, that's the way it is. So you try not to worry about it because worry doesn't really do anything, but the prayer and the faith does.
Awesome.
I was just thinking of what could be looked at as a challenge. And I think it was one of the things I said in the book, Dr. J's book, the decision to come here to Albany. At the time I was a supervisor, I had to take, as those who work for the state, you have to take a test. I was in the position provisionally. I took the test. I passed the test, but didn't score high enough to remain in the position. And so I was someone else. I got bumped from that job. And I remember everyone was saying, well, what are you going to do? I was a counselor. I always thought I was a good counselor. And it was something I was passionate about. So I was like, well, I'll continue. I'll go back to being a counselor. The director of the program here in Albany sent me a brochure about the Regents program. And so I looked at it and I decided, well, I'll apply, because initially they had said there were positions in New York City because I was living in New York at the time. I was accepted. Then there was no positions in New York. That meant I would have to move. I had a 3-year-old. I recently separated from my husband at the time. And I was like, I'm going to a new place. But I remember in that conversation with my mother, I said, there's a light at the end of this tunnel. So I have to, I have to take that step. And I did. And I met people. As I said, God has always placed people in my path who became longtime friends. I met Beverly in that fellowship program. And here we are, almost 30 years later, still friends. And one of the first people who went through the first year of the program, we are still friends. And so it was having that faith that, okay, this didn't work out. It's not the end of the world. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something I would like for everyone to know, particularly young people, that you will face challenges because that's part of life. God didn't say things weren't going to come in our path. Yeah, they will. How you deal with them is what's going to set you apart. Mm-hmm. And it's not just one thing that's going to challenge you. There will be many, and you can overcome many. And so it is that belief and working and pressing forward toward the mark, I think makes the difference.
Huge. And Deacon Deb, that was a perfect segue to this question. I mean, it was perfect. That was seamless. What you three ladies have shared tonight doesn't just impact, and it's not wisdom for just women. It's wisdom for everyone, right? But for that young lady who's watching right now, for that single mom who's watching right now, for that working professional who's trying to balance it all, right? What do you say to them? What's your final word of advice, wisdom that you can give them that's going to help them make it throughout the rest of their journey?
Wow.
I know I know we could be here all night, right?
Yeah. That's a big question. I guess I would say one is, take care of yourself. I'm still learning how to do that, as you know, because unless you take care of yourself, you really can't do much of anything. That take care includes your mental health, your spiritual health, your physical health, all the way around. Surround yourself with people who are similar, well, not necessarily similar. I'm trying to say people who have a belief system in something greater than themselves. You want positive people, people who you can go to and talk to about things. I mean, everybody nowadays seems to have a gazillion online friends that they never see, probably will never see. They're not going to come when you get sick or you got to move. They're not coming. So you want some people who actually come, people you can actually interact with, and try not to doubt yourself. If you've done the work, as Dr. Boone said, it's about knowing, it's about competence. You know something, know it well, do it well. That's what inspires confidence in you and gives yourself confidence as well, is that you know something, you can teach something, you can share something. So I just say, hang in there, keep learning, keep going through whatever it is you need to go through to move to the place you want to get to. Make your plan.
And you'd asked about making decisions. For me, I try on a decision, and the physician in me takes my pulse. If my pulse goes up, that's an answer. I'm anxious. That's probably not the right answer. If I settle and my heart rate goes down, I feel at peace. Then for me, God is telling me that's for you. And what is for me is for me, and what's for someone else is for someone else. So for me, I have to spend a half hour every morning in prayer and meditation. I need to get settled. I have to journal. I have to get real clear about what's my focus, what is my strength, what is it that I need to get done today. I need to get very clear about it. Otherwise, everybody's going to come in at me and wants from me, it goes at me. And I need to be clear about what I need to get done. And then, as you said, exercise, trying to make sure that I get my heart rate down so that I might live a bit longer, or at least try to live out the life that God has for me. Otherwise, you guys will come see me in this direction. So I think in order for us to pour into others, we have to have something to pour into them. So I think trying to get clear and to give and to live the life that God would have for us to give. I think making time to get clear in our heads, making time for our bodies, trying to eat well, and then seeking God's face and just trying to, God, what would you have me to do today? And just getting clear and focused and trying to be as strong as we can and turning off social media, at least again for a half hour to an hour, because the world will come at you and give you horrible thoughts about yourself, especially for young people, working with young people. They just get so bombarded. I think as old folks, we know better, but young people really don't get clear about the messages that they get. So trying to remind young people to turn that stuff off. And then God will speak to you. If you get quiet, he'll tell you. He's real clear. But you got to get quiet enough in your head to hear him. So if you don't make time to do that, you won't hear from him.
I think the important points that they both have made. I think one of the other things I would add is to be honest with yourself. To understand, I think there's strength in knowing what you know, but it's also knowing what you don't know and being comfortable in the fact that you don't know everything. Right. Okay, so it's okay to ask somebody. Right. It's okay to go to someone else. It's okay to have, and we would desire for everyone to have somebody trusted, confident. You know, I'm a deacon here, but I ask Deacon Johnson a lot of stuff. You know, I go to other deacons and ask them questions. You know, so there's things in your life that will come before you, but you don't have to feel that you have to have known all of them or know what to do with everything, because hopefully you've cultivated friends along the way, that you've made a relationship. You have a relationship with God. You have, you know, good friends and material that you read and study that you can go to. And even with your colleagues, when you find yourself in supervisory positions, you want to bring close to you people who have information in areas that you don't. You don't have to know it all. It's bringing it all around the table, being able to help manage and collectively bring and create that space that people can share and work together to go forward. So I think that's one of the things I would like to share. Yes.
Well, ladies, it's been a pleasure. I mean, if y'all got time, we can stay for another hour and just talk. I don't think people watching want to stay around for another hour, but thank you. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to come and share your wisdom and share your knowledge. And again, you know, celebrating women throughout the whole year. But we just paused in March to turn up the volume a little bit much. And you all have, without question, made an impact on this Macedonia family and our community at large. So I just want to thank you, from me to you, from Macedonia to you, from the community to you. Thank you for the impact that you've made. Again, thank you, everyone who tuned in tonight. On this Wednesday night, we will have another installment next Wednesday. Tonight was Walking in Purpose. Next Wednesday will be Walking in Destiny. And until then, in between tonight and next Wednesday is Sunday. So we hope to see you in church on Sunday morning at 11 a.m. Until then, take care and God bless.